Chapter 14. Sara and Mary had decided that they would go to the lake and walk up behind the houses toward the woods. Sara was now on her way to Mary's, passing the vacant lot where a baseball game was in progress. She glanced up and watched as she walked down the sidewalk. The baseball game had been going on for an hour, with the score still 0-0, and the players, dusty and tired, were playing silently without hope. She was almost past the field when she heard someone call, "Hey, have you found your brother yet, Sara?" She recognized the voice of Joe Melby and said no, without looking at him. "What?" She turned, looked directly at him, and said, "You will be pleased and delighted to learn that we have not." She continued walking down the street. The blood began to pound in her head. Joe Melby was the one person she did not want to see on this particular day. There was something disturbing about him. She did not know him really, had hardly even spoken to him, and yet she hated him so much the sight of him made her sick. "Is there anything I can do?" "No." "If he's up in the woods, I could help look. I know about as much about those hills as anybody." He left the game and started walking behind her with his hands in his pockets. "No, thank you. I want to help." She swirled around and faced him, her eyes blazing. "I do not want your help." They looked at each other. Something twisted inside her, and she felt suddenly ill. She thought she would never drink cherry Kool-Aid again as long as she lived. Joe Melby did not say anything but moved one foot back and forth on the sidewalk, shuffling at some sand. Anybody who would steal a little boy's watch," she said, cutting off his words, and it was a relief to make this accusation to his face at last, "is somebody whose help I can very well do without." Her head was pounding so loudly she could hardly hear her own words. For months, ever since the incident of the stolen watch, she had waited for this moment, had planned exactly what she would say. Now that it was said, she did not feel the triumph she had imagined at all. "Is that what's wrong with you?" He looked at her. "You think I stole your brother's watch?" "I know you did." "How?" "Because I asked Charlie who stole his watch, and I kept asking him. And one day on the school bus, when I asked him, he pointed right straight at you." He was confused. He wasn't that confused. You probably thought he wouldn't be able to tell on you because he couldn't talk. But he pointed right. He was confused. "I gave the watch back to him. I didn't take it." "I don't believe you." "You believe what you want then, but I didn't take that watch. I thought that matter had been settled." "Huh." She turned and started walking with great speed down the hill. For some reason she was not as sure about Joe Melby as she had been before, and this was even more disturbing. He did take the watch, she said to herself. She could not bear to think that she had been mistaken in this, that she had taken revenge on the wrong person. Behind her there were sudden cheers as someone hit a home run. The ball went into the street. Joe ran, picked it up, and tossed it to a boy in the field. Sara did not look around. "Hey, wait a minute," she heard Joe call. "I'm coming." She did not turn around. She had fallen into that trap before. Once, when she had been walking down the street, she had heard a car behind her, and the horn sounding and a boy's voice shouting, "Hey, beautiful!" And she had turned around. Then, too late, she had seen that the girl they were honking and shouting at was Rosie Camden on the opposite side of the street. Rosie Camden, who was Miss Battelle District Fair and Miss Buckwheat Queen, and 100 other things. Sara had looked down quickly, not knowing whether anyone had seen her or not, and her face had burned so fiercely she had thought it would be red forever. Now she kept walking quickly with her head down. "Wait, Sara." Still, she did not turn around or show that she had heard him. "Wait!" He ran, caught up with her, and started walking beside her. "All the boys say they want to help." She hesitated but kept walking. She could not think of anything to say. She knew how circus men on stilts felt when they walked, because her legs seemed to be moving in the same awkward way, great exaggerated steps that got her nowhere. She thought she might start crying, so she said quickly, "Oh, all right." Then tears did come to her eyes, sudden and hot, and she looked down at her feet. He said, "Where should we start? Have you got any ideas?" "I think he's up in the woods. I took him to see the swans yesterday, and I think he was looking for them when he got lost." "Probably up that way." She nodded. He paused, then added, "We'll find him." She did not answer, could not, because tears were spilling down her cheeks. So she turned quickly and walked alone to Mary's house and waited on the sidewalk until Mary came out to join her. Chapter 15. She and Mary were almost across the open field before Sara spoke. Then she said, "Guess who just stopped me and gave me the big sympathy talk about Charlie?" "I don't know. Who?" "Joe Melby." "Really? What did he say?" "He wants to help look for Charlie. He makes me sick." "I think it's nice that he wants to help." "Well, maybe if he'd stolen your brother's watch, you wouldn't think it was so nice." Mary was silent for a moment. Then she said, "I probably shouldn't tell you this, but he didn't steal that watch, Sara." "Huh?" "No, he really didn't." Sara looked at her and said, "How do you know?" "I can't tell you how I know, because I promised I wouldn't, but I know he didn't." "How?" "I can't tell. I promised." "That never stopped you before. Now, Mary Wychick, you tell me what you know this minute." "I promised." "Mary, tell me." "Mom would kill me if she knew I told you." "She won't know." "Well, your aunt went to see Joe Melby's mother." "What?" "Aunt Willie went over to see Joe Melby's mother." "She didn't." "Yes, she did too, because my mother was right there when it happened. It was about 2 weeks after Charlie had gotten the watch back." "I don't believe you." "Well, it's the truth. You told Aunt Willie that Joe had stolen the watch. Remember, you told everybody, and so Aunt Willie went over to see Joe's mother." "She wouldn't do such a terrible thing." "Well, she did." "And what did Mrs. Melby say?" "She called Joe into the room and she said, 'Joe, did you steal the little Godfrey boy's watch?' And he said, 'No.' What did you expect him to say in front of his mother? 'Yes, I stole the watch.' Huh, that doesn't prove anything." "So then she said, 'I want the truth now. Do you know who did take the watch?' And he said that nobody had stolen the watch. So where did it disappear to for a week? I'd like to know." "I'm coming to that." He said some of the fellows were out in front of the drugstore and Charlie was standing there waiting for the school bus. You were in the drugstore. Remember, it was the day we were getting the stamps for letters to those pen pals who never answered? Remember the stamps wouldn't come out of the machine? Well, anyway, these boys outside the store started teasing Charlie with some candy. And while Charlie was trying to get the candy, one of the boys took off Charlie's watch without Charlie noticing it. Then they were going to ask Charlie what time it was, and when he looked down at his watch, he would get upset because the watch would be gone. They were just going to tease him. Finks, Finks! Only you came out of the drugstore right then and saw what they were doing with the candy and told them off, and the bus came and you hustled Charlie on the bus before anybody had a chance to give back the watch. Then they got scared to give it back, and that's the whole story. Joe didn't steal the watch at all. He wasn't even in on it. He came up right when you did and didn't even know what had happened. Later, when he found out, he got the watch back and gave it to Charlie. That's all." "Why didn't you tell me before this?" "Because I just found out about it at lunch. For 4 months my mother has known all about this thing and never mentioned it. because she said it was one of those things best forgotten. Why did she tell you now? That's the way my mom is. We were talking about Charlie at the dinner table, and suddenly she comes up with this. Like one time she casually mentioned that she had had a long talk with Mr. Homer about me. Mr. Homer, the principal. She went over there and they had a long discussion, and she never mentioned it for a year. That is the worst thing Aunt Willie has ever done. Well, don't let on that you know, or I'll be in real trouble. I won't, but honestly, I could just... You promised. I know, you don't have to keep reminding me. It makes me feel terrible, though, I can tell you that. She walked with her head bent forward. Terrible. You know what I just did when I saw him? What? Accused him of stealing the watch. Sara, you didn't. I did too. I can't help myself. When I think somebody has done something mean to Charlie, I can't forgive them. I want to keep after them and keep after them, just like Aunt Willie said. I even sort of suspected Joe Melby hadn't really taken that watch, and I still kept on. Shh! Be quiet a minute. Mary was carrying her transistor radio, and she held it up between them. Listen. The announcer was saying, we have a report of a missing child in the cast section. 10-year-old Charlie Godfrey, who has been missing from his home since sometime last night. He is wearing blue pajamas and brown felt slippers, has a watch on one wrist and an identification bracelet with his name and address on the other. He is a mentally handicapped child who cannot speak and may become alarmed when approached by a stranger. Please notify the police immediately if you have seen this youngster. The two girls looked at each other, then continued walking across the field in silence. Chapter 16. Mary and Sara were up in the field by the woods. They had been searching for Charlie for an hour without finding a trace of him. Mary said, I don't care how I look. I am taking off this scarf. It must be 100 degrees out here. Charlie, Sara called as she had been doing from time to time. Her voice had begun to sound strained. She had called so often. Charlie. Sara, do you know where we are? Mary asked after a moment. Of course. The lake's down there, and the old shack's over there, and you can see them as soon as we get up a little higher. If we get up a little higher, Mary said in a tired voice. You didn't have to come, you know. I wanted to come, only I just want to make sure we don't get lost. I have to go to Benny Hoffman's party tonight. I know, you told me 10 times. So I don't want to get lost. Mary walked a few steps without speaking. I still can't figure out why I was invited, because Benny Hoffman hardly knows me. I've just seen him 2 times this whole summer at the pool. Why do you think he... Come on, will you? It seems useless, if you ask me, to just keep walking when we don't really know which way he went. Aunt Willie thinks he went in the old coal mine. I know, but she only thinks that because she associates the mine with tragedy, because her uncle and brother were killed in that coal mine. But Charlie wouldn't go in there. Remember that time we went into the Bryant cellar after they moved out, and he wouldn't even come in there because it was cold and dark and sort of scary? Yes, I do remember, because I sprained my ankle jumping down from the window and had to wait 2 hours while you looked through old Life magazines. I was not looking through old magazines. I could hear you. I was down there in that dark cellar with the rats, and you were upstairs, and I was yelling for help, and you kept saying, I'm going for help right now, and I could hear the pages turning and turning and turning. Well, I got you out, didn't I? Finally. Sara paused again. Charlie, Charlie. The girls waited in the high grass for an answer, then began to walk again. Mary said, Maybe we should have waited for the others before we started looking. They're going to have a regular organized posse with everybody walking along together. There may be a helicopter. The longer we wait, the harder it will be to find him. Well, I've got to get home in time to bathe and take my hair down. I know. You're going to Benny Hoffman's party. You don't have to sound so mad about it. I didn't ask to be invited. I am not mad because you were invited to Benny Hoffman's party. I couldn't care less about Benny Hoffman's party. I'm just mad because you're slowing me up on this search." "Well, if I'm slowing you up so much, then maybe I'll just go on home." "That suits me fine." They looked at each other without speaking. Between them, the radio began announcing, "Volunteers are needed in the Cass area in the search for young Charlie Godfrey, who disappeared from his home sometime during the night. A search of the Cheat Woods will begin at 3 o'clock this afternoon." Mary said, "Oh, I'll keep looking. I'll try to walk faster." Sara shrugged, turned, and started walking up the hill, followed by Mary. They came to the old fence that once separated the pasture from the woods. Sara walked slowly beside the fence. "Charlie," she called. "Would he come if he heard you, do you think?" Sara nodded. "But if they get 100 people out here clomping through the woods and hollering, he's not going to come. He'll be too scared. I know him." "I don't see how you can be so sure he came up this way." "I just know. There's something about me that makes me understand Charlie. It's like I know how he feels about things. Like sometimes I'll be walking down the street and I'll pass the jeweler's and I'll think that if Charlie were here, he would want to stand right there and look at those watches all afternoon. And I know right where he'd stand and how he'd put his hands up on the glass and how his face would look. And yesterday I knew he was going to love the Swans so much that he wasn't ever going to want to leave. I know how he feels." "You just think you do." "No, I know. I was thinking about the sky one night, and I was looking up at the stars, and I was thinking about how the sky goes on forever, and I couldn't understand it no matter how long I thought. And finally I got kind of nauseated. And right then I started thinking, well, this is how Charlie feels about some things. You know how it makes him sick sometimes to try to print letters for a long time and—" "Look who's coming," Mary interrupted. "Where?" "In the trees, walking toward us. Joe Melby." "You're lying. You're just trying to make me—" "It is him. Look." She quickly began to tie her scarf over her rollers again. "And you talk about me needing eyeglasses." "Cut across the field, quick," Sara said. "No, wait, go under the fence. Move, will you, Mary, and leave that scarf alone. Get under the fence. I'm not going to face him. I mean it." "I'm not going under any fence. Anyway, it would look worse for us to run away than to just walk by casually." "I cannot walk by casually after what I said." "Well, you're going to have to face him sometime, and it might as well be now, when everyone feels sorry for you about your brother." She called out, "Hi, Joe, having any luck?" He came up to them and held out a brown felt slipper and looked at Sara. "Is this Charlie's?" Sara looked at the familiar object and forgot the incident of the watch for a moment. "Where did you find it?" "Right up there by the fence. I had just picked it up when I saw you." She took the slipper and, holding it against her, said, "Oh, I knew he came up this way, but it's a relief to have some proof of it." "I was just talking to Mr. Aker," Joe continued, "and he said he heard his dogs barking up here last night. He had them tied out by the shack, and he thought maybe someone was prowling around." "Probably Charlie," Mary said. "That's what I figured. Somebody ought to go down to the gas station and tell the people. They're organizing a big search now, and half of the men are planning to go up to the mine." There was a pause, and Mary said, "Well, I guess I could go, only I don't know whether I'll have time to get back up here." She looked at Joe. "I promised Benny Hoffman I'd come to his party tonight. That's why my hair's in rollers." "Tell them I found the slipper about a half-mile up behind the acres at the old fence," Joe said. "Sure. Are you coming to Benny's tonight?" "Maybe." "Come. It's going to be fun." Sara cleared her throat and said, "Well, I think I'll get on with my search, if you two will excuse me." She turned and started walking up the hill again. There seemed to be a long silence, in which even the sound of the cicadas in the grass was absent. She thrashed at the high weeds with her tennis shoes and hugged Charlie's slipper to her. "Wait a minute, Sara. I'll come with you," Joe Melby said. He joined her and she nodded, still looking down at the slipper. There was a picture of an Indian chief stamped on the top of the shoe, and there was a loneliness to the Indian's profile, even stamped crudely on the felt, that she had never noticed before. She cleared her throat again. "There is just one thing I want to say." Her voice did not even sound familiar, a tape-recorded voice. He waited, then said, "Go ahead." She did not speak for a moment, but continued walking noisily through the weeds. "Go ahead." "If you'll just wait a minute, I'm trying to think how to say this." The words she wanted to say, "I'm sorry," would not come out at all. They continued walking in silence, and then Joe said, "You know, I was just reading an article about a guru over in India, and he hasn't spoken a word in 28 years. 28 years, and he hasn't said one word in all that time. And everyone has been waiting all those years to hear what he's going to say when he finally does speak, because it's supposed to be some great wise word. And I thought about this poor guy sitting there, and for 28 years he's been trying to think of something to say that would be the least bit great, and he can't think of anything, and he must be getting really desperate now. And every day it gets worse and worse. Is there supposed to be some sort of message in that story?" "Maybe." She smiled. "Well, I just wanted to say that I'm sorry." She thought again that she was going to start crying, and she said to herself, "You are nothing but a big soft snail." Snail! "That's all right. I just found out about Aunt Willie going to see your mother." He shrugged. "She didn't mean anything by it. But it was a terrible thing. It wasn't all that bad. At least it was different to be accused of something I didn't do for a change. But to be called in like that in front of Aunt Willie and Mary's mother, no, it was terrible." She turned and walked into the woods. "Don't worry about it. I'm tough. I'm indestructible. I'm like that coyote in Roadrunner who's always getting flattened and dynamited and crushed, and in the next scene is strolling along completely normal again. I just acted too hastily. That's one of my main faults. I do that too. Not like me. Worse, probably. Do you remember when we used to get grammar school report cards, and the grades would be on one part of the card, and on the other side would be personality things the teacher would check, like, "Does not accept criticism constructively"? Sara smiled. "I always used to get a check on that one," she said. "Who didn't? And then they had one, acts impetuously and without consideration for others, or something like that. And one year I got a double check on that one." "You didn't." "Yes, I did. 2nd grade. Miss McLeod. I remember she told the whole class that this was the first year she had ever had to give double checks to any student, and everyone in the room was scared to open his report card to see if he had got the double checks. And when I opened mine, there they were, 2 sets of double checks, on acting impetuously and on not accepting criticism, and single checks on everything else. Were you crushed?" "Naturally. I thought you were so tough and indestructible." "Well, I am." He paused. "I think." He pointed to the left. "Let's go up this way." She agreed with a nod and went ahead of him between the trees. Chapter 17. There was a ravine in the forest, a deep cut in the earth, and Charlie had made his way into it through an early morning fog. By chance, blindly stepping through the fog with his arms outstretched, he had managed to pick the one path that led into the ravine, and when the sun came out and the fog burned away, he could not find the way out. All the ravine looked the same in the daylight, the high walls, the masses of weeds and wild berry bushes, the trees. He had wandered around for a while, following the little paths made by dirt washed down from the hillside, but finally he sat down on a log and stared straight ahead without seeing. After a while he roused enough to wipe his hands over his cheeks, where the tears and dirt had dried together, and to rub his puffed eyelids. Then he looked down, saw his bare foot, put it on top of his slipper, and sat with his feet overlapped. There was a dullness about him now. He had had so many scares, heard so many frightening noises, started at so many shadows, been hurt so often that all his senses were worn to a flat hopelessness. He would just sit here forever. It was not the first time Charlie had been lost, but never before had there been this finality. He had become separated from Aunt Willie once at the county fair, and had not even known he was lost until she had come bursting out of the crowd screaming, "Charlie! Charlie!" and enveloped him. He had been lost in school once in the hall and could not find his way back to his room, and he had walked up and down the halls, frightened by all the strange children, looking out of every door, until one of the boys was sent out to lead him to his room. But in all his life there had never been an experience like this one. He bent over and looked down at his watch, his eyes on the tiny red hand. For the first time he noticed it was no longer moving. Holding his breath in his concern, he brought the watch closer to his face. The hand was still. For a moment he could not believe it. He watched it closely, waiting. Still the hand did not move. He shook his hand back and forth as if he were trying to shake the watch off his wrist. He had seen Sara do this to her watch. Then he held the watch to his ear. It was silent. He had had the watch for 5 months, and never before had it failed him. He had not even known it could fail, and now it was silent and still. He put his hand over the watch, covering it completely. He waited. His breathing had begun to quicken again. His hand on the watch was almost clammy. He waited. Then slowly, cautiously, he removed his hand and looked at the tiny red hand on the dial. It was motionless. The trick had not worked. Bending over the watch, he looked closely at the stem. Aunt Willie always wound the watch for him every morning after breakfast, but he did not know how she did this. He took the stem in his fingers, pulled at it clumsily, then harder, and it came off. He looked at it. Then, as he attempted to put it back on the watch, it fell to the ground and was lost in the leaves. A chipmunk ran in front of him and scurried up the bank. Distracted for a moment, Charlie got up and walked toward it. The chipmunk paused and then darted into a hole, leaving Charlie standing in the shadows trying to see where it had gone. He went closer to the bank and pulled at the leaves, but he could not even find the place among the roots where the chipmunk had disappeared. Suddenly, something seemed to explode within Charlie, and he began to cry noisily. He threw himself on the bank and began kicking, flailing at the ground, at the invisible chipmunk, at the silent watch. He wailed, yielding in helplessness to his anguish, and his piercing screams, uttered again and again, seemed to hang in the air so that they overlapped. His fingers tore at the tree roots and dug beneath the leaves and scratched, animal-like, at the dark earth. His body sagged, and he rolled down the bank and was silent. He looked up at the trees, his chest still heaving with sobs, his face strangely still. After a moment, his eyelids drooped, and he fell asleep. Chapter 18. "Charlie! Charlie!" The only answer was the call of a bird in the branches overhead, one long, tremulous whistle. "He's not even within hearing distance," Sara said. For the past hour, she and Joe Melby had been walking deeper and deeper into the forest without pause, and now the trees were so thick that only small spots of sunlight found their way through the heavy foliage. "Charlie! Oh, Charlie!" She waited, looking down at the ground. Joe said, "You want to rest for a while?" Sara shook her head. She suddenly wanted to see her brother so badly that her throat began to close. It was a tight feeling she got sometimes when she wanted something, like the time she had had the measles and had wanted to see her father, so much she couldn't even swallow. Now she thought that if she had a whole glass of ice water and she was thirsty, she probably would not be able to drink a single drop. If you can make it a little farther, there's a place at the top of the hill where the strip mining is, and you can see the whole valley from there. I can make it. Well, we can rest first if I can make it." She suddenly felt a little better. She thought that if she could stand up there on top of the hill and look down and see, somewhere in that huge green valley, a small plump figure in blue pajamas, she would ask for nothing more in life. She thought of the valley as a relief map where everything would be shiny and smooth, and her brother would be right where she could spot him at once. Her cry, "There he is," would ring like a bell over the valley, and everyone would hear her and know that Charlie had been found. She paused, leaned against a tree for a moment, and then continued. Her legs had begun to tremble. It was the time of afternoon when she usually sat down in front of the television and watched game shows, the shows where the married couples tried to guess things about each other and where girls had to pick out dates they couldn't see. She would sit in the doorway to the hall where she always sat, and Charlie would come in and watch with her, and the living room would be dark and smell of the pine-scented cleaner Aunt Willie used. Then the early show would come on, and she would sit through the old movie, leaning forward in the doorway, making fun, saying things like, "Now, Charlie, we'll have the old convict turning honest scene." And Charlie, sitting on the stool closer to the television, would nod without understanding. She was good, too, at joining in the dialogue with the actors. When the cowboy would say something like, "Things are quiet around here tonight," she would join in with, "Yeah, too quiet," right on cue. It seemed strange to be out here in the woods with Joe Melby instead of in the living room with Charlie, watching Flame of Araby, which was the early movie for that afternoon. Her progress up the hill seemed slower and slower. It was like the time she had won the slow bicycle race, a race in which she had to go as slow as possible without letting a foot touch the ground. And she had gone slower and slower, all the while feeling a strong compulsion to speed ahead and cross the finish line first. At the end of the race, it had been she and T.R. Peters, and they had paused just before the finish line, balancing motionless on their bicycles. The time had seemed endless, and then T.R. lost his balance and his foot touched the ground, and Sara was the winner. She slipped on some dry leaves, went down on her knees, straightened, and paused to catch her breath. "Are you all right?" "Yes, I just slipped." She waited for a moment, bent over her knees, then she called, "Charlie, Charlie," without lifting her head. "Oh, Charlie," Joe shouted. "Oh, Charlie," Joe shouted above her. Sara knew Charlie would shout back if he heard her, the long wailing cry he gave sometimes when he was frightened during the night. It was such a familiar cry that for a moment she thought she heard it. She waited, still touching the ground with one hand, until she was sure there was no answer. "Come on," Joe said, holding out his hand. He pulled her to her feet, and she stood looking up at the top of the hill. Machines had cut away the earth there to get at the veins of coal, and the earth had been pushed down the hill to form a huge bank. "I'll never get up that," she said. She leaned against a tree whose leaves were covered with the pale, fine dirt which had filtered down when the machines had cut away the hill. "Sure you will. I've been up it a dozen times." He took her hand and she started after him, moving sideways up the steep bank. The dirt crumbled beneath her feet and she slid, skinned one knee, and then slipped again. When she had regained her balance, she laughed wryly and said, "What's going to happen is that I'll end up pulling you all the way down the hill." "No, I've got you. Keep coming." She started again, putting one foot carefully above the other, picking her way over the stones. When she paused, he said, "Keep coming. We're almost there." I think it's a trick, like at the dentist when he says, "I'm almost through drilling." Then he drills for another hour and says, "Now, I'm really almost through drilling." And he keeps on and then says, "There's just one more spot and then I'll be practically really through." We must go to the same dentist. I don't think I can make it. There's no skin at all left on the sides of my legs. Well, we're really almost practically there now, in the words of your dentist. She fell across the top of the dirt bank on her stomach, rested for a moment, and then turned and looked down the valley. Whew. Just checking to see how much further. I'm going to read one or maybe two more chapters. I hope you can hear over the lawnmower. Chapter 19. She could not speak for a moment. There lay the whole valley in a way she had never imagined it, a tiny finger of civilization set in a sweeping expanse of dark forest. The black treetops seemed to crowd against the yards, the houses, the roads, giving the impression that at any moment the trees would close over the houses like waves and leave nothing but an unbroken line of black-green leaves waving in the sunlight. Up the valley she could see the intersection where they shopped, the drugstore, the gas station where her mother had once won a set of 24-stemmed glasses which Aunt Willie would not allow them to use, the grocery store, the lot where the yellow school buses were parked for the summer. She could look over the valley and see another hill where white cows were all grouped together by a fence, and beyond that another hill and then another. She looked back at the valley and she saw the lake, and for the first time since she had stood up on the hill she remembered Charlie. Raising her hand to her mouth, she called, "Charlie, Charlie, Charlie!" There was a faint echo that seemed to waver in her ears. "Charlie, oh Charlie!" Her voice was so loud it seemed to ram into the valley. Sara waited. She looked down at the forest, and everything was so quiet it seemed to her that the whole valley, the whole world was waiting with her. "Charlie, hey, Charlie!" Joe shouted. "Charlie!" She made the sound of it last a long time. "Can you hear me?" With her eyes she followed the trail she knew he must have taken. The house, the acres vacant lot, the old pasture, the forest. The forest that seemed powerful enough to engulf a whole valley, she thought with a sinking feeling, could certainly swallow up a young boy. "Charlie, Charlie, Charlie!" There was a waver in the last syllable that betrayed how near she was to tears. She looked down at the Indian slipper she was still holding. "Charlie, oh Charlie!" She waited. There was not a sound anywhere. "Charlie, where are you?" "Hey, Charlie!" Joe shouted. They waited in the same dense silence. A cloud passed in front of the sun, and a breeze began to blow through the trees. Then there was silence again. "Charlie, Charlie, 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 Charlie!" She paused, listened, then bent abruptly and put Charlie's slipper to her eyes. She waited for the hot tears that had come so often this summer, the tears that had seemed so close only a moment before. Now her eyes remained dry. "I have cried over myself 100 times this summer," she thought. "I have wept over my big feet and my skinny legs and my nose. I have even cried over my stupid shoes. And now when I have a true sadness, there are no tears left." She held the felt side of the slipper against her eyes like a blindfold and stood there, feeling the hot sun on her head and the wind wrapping around her legs, conscious of the height and the valley sweeping down from her feet. Listen, just because you can't hear him doesn't mean anything. He could be... Wait a minute. She lowered the slipper and looked down the valley. A sudden wind blew dust into her face, and she lifted her hand to shield her eyes. "I thought I heard something." "Charlie! Answer me right this minute." She waited with the slipper held against her breast, one hand to her eyes, her whole body motionless, concentrating on her brother. Then she stiffened. She thought again she heard something. Charlie's long, high wail. Charlie could sound sadder than anyone when he cried. In her anxiety, she took the slipper and twisted it again and again as if she were wringing water out. She called, then stopped abruptly and listened. She looked at Joe, and he shook his head slowly. She looked away. A bird rose from the trees below and flew toward the hills in the distance. She waited until she could see it no longer, and then slowly, still listening for the call that didn't come, she sank to the ground and sat with her head bent over her knees. Beside her, Joe scuffed his foot in the dust and sent a cascade of rocks and dirt down the bank. When the sound of it faded, he began to call, "Charlie! Hey, Charlie!" again and again. Chapter 20. Charlie awoke, but he lay for a moment without opening his eyes. He did not remember where he was, but he had a certain dread of seeing it. There were great parts of his life that were lost to Charlie, blank spaces that he could never fill in. He would find himself in a strange place and not know how he had got there. Like the time Sara had been hit in the nose with a baseball at the Dairy Queen, and the blood and the sight of Sara kneeling on the ground in helpless pain had frightened him so much that he had turned and run without direction, in a frenzy, dashing headlong up the street, blind to cars and people. By chance, Mr. Wychuck had seen him, put him in the car, and driven him home, and Aunt Willie had put him to bed. But later he remembered none of this. He had only awakened in bed and looked at the crumpled bit of ice cream cone still clenched in his hand, and wondered about it. His whole life had been built on a strict routine, and as long as this routine was kept up, he felt safe and well. The same foods, the same bed, the same furniture in the same place, the same seat on the school bus, the same class procedure were all important to him. But always there could be the unexpected, the dreadful surprise that would topple his carefully constructed life in an instant. The first thing he became aware of was the twigs pressing into his face, and he put his hand under his cheek. Still he did not open his eyes. Pictures began to drift into his mind. He saw Aunt Willie's cigar box, which was filled with old jewelry and buttons and knickknacks, and he found that he could remember every item in that box: the string of white beads without a clasp, the old earrings, the tiny book with souvenir fold-out pictures of New York, the plastic decorations from cakes, the turtle made of seashells. Every item was so real that he opened his eyes and was surprised to see, instead of the glittering contents of the box, the dull and unfamiliar forest. He raised his head and immediately felt the aching of his body. Slowly he sat up and looked down at his hands. His fingernails were black with earth, 2 of them broken below the quick, and he got up slowly and sat on the log behind him and inspected his fingers more closely. Then he sat up straight. His hands dropped to his lap, his head cocked to the side like a bird listening. Slowly he straightened until he was standing. At his side, his fingers twitched at the empty air as if to grasp something. He took a step forward, still with his head to the side. He remained absolutely still. Then he began to cry out in a hoarse, excited voice, again and again, screaming now, because he had just heard someone far away calling his name. Until next time.